Today we are talking about Ray Gamble, one of Tacoma's most interesting historical characters. Not much can be found about him online, aside from Michael's excellent articles and newspaper clippings. But we are lucky enough to have with us today the largest repository of Ray Gamble knowledge, which is Michael Sullivan's head. All right, Michael, why don't you start us off? Take us on a story through time. Tell us a story about this guy.
Ray Gamble.
Well, Ray, his life, as we understand it, is in his own autobiography of stories that he kind of wrote and told. So as Ray tells the story, the origin story, and we know from census records and so on that Ray was born 1888, and by about 1905, he was here in Tacoma. He was born, I think he was born in Arkansas, and then made his way up here kind of on his own, young man. The way he tells the story, he gets off the train station down at the old Villard station, so before Union Station was built, gets off and looks around, and it's raining out, and he realizes everybody's kind of lugging their baggage around, and so he just takes his bag, throws it into a locker, and begins immediately carrying people's bags for him in exchange for money. So I think I'm not so sure that isn't an apocryphal story, but Ray's point was that he was an industrious young man, that he was going to find a way to make a living when he got here. We do know that to be true as he plays that out in his whole life. Ray ends up settling in Tacoma by the 1913, he's working in a fish store downtown. And
As like a clerk?
Well, yeah, he's a clerk, but eventually he'll own the fish market.
Gotcha.
But he starts out just as a clerk. And this is really where the myth-making starts, really, in the very beginning. Because as Ray tells it, he's working in the fish store down there, and he's one day approached by a Chinese, comes in and wants to buy some shrimp from him. The Chinese man doesn't really have any money, but he's got a little carved elephant that he wants to trade to Ray for the shrimp. And Ray decides, what the heck? It sounds like a good deal, and the guy looks like he needs food. And so he makes the trade. And it just kind of is transformational for Ray. It's a story he tells over and over throughout his entire life. That almost as if by magic, as soon as the gentleman had left the shop, another fellow who he knew comes in and says, Ray, I forgot I owed you this money, and he gives him a $20 gold piece. And out of the blue, and Ray immediately associates that bit of luck with the elephant with the $20. And that would be something that would stick with him his entire life. And Ray's upbeat just view of the world was this idea that he was just a lucky man. That was just his view of things. And later on in life, he would return to that attitude over his long 86-year-long life. He would just constantly, that was his worldview. I'm a lucky guy.
I'm a lucky guy.
So
that it triggered his passion for elephant collecting.
It did.
Yeah.
It created a passion, a playfulness kind of about collecting elephants that would become a passion. Now, there's another version of it that connects directly with Ray's fortunes, and that is a story he tells that the Chinese gentleman who had come here was a firecracker man, which meant that during the railroad building era, a lot of the demolition work that was done in digging tunnels and doing the construction work of the railroad was left to Chinese specialists, men that were called firecracker men. And they were experts at explosives, nitroglycerin and dynamite.
Okay.
And that Chinese gentleman, in giving him the elephant, had also, this is a little blurry, but somehow it shared with him some of the secrets that came from being able to work with explosives. And this was a high-risk business. I mean, of the Chinese demolition experts, the firecracker men, probably the most dangerous, industrial job there was in building railroads. And to some degree, a cynic would say that the Chinese were viewed as somewhat dispensable. So they got the work, So that whole idea. But anyway, as Ray said, that the Chinese elder, the old firecracker man, had shared with him the fact that over time, the reason that there was some confidence taken in the demolition work was that there were some devices, some secrets to being able to stabilize the explosives. And you have to imagine, there would be a team of demolition experts. Just imagine you've got a sheer rock face and you've got to expose a shelf in that rock face for the railroad to move across on a steep mountain hillside. They would lower in a wicker basket on a rope. One of the firecracker men would go down carrying the explosives, and he would drill out a hole in the rock with a hammer and chisel and would set a charge and light the charge. And then the guys upstairs would, just as fast as they could, pull the guy up out of the blast zone before the whole rock face explodes and goes away.
So if he miscalculated the length of that wick, or if the men above were not pulling quite fast enough.
Or if the rope got caught up on something.
Goodness.
Yep. So, and the same thing was true doing the tunnel work where, you'd set a charge in a tunnel and, if the rock was weak up above or whatever, if the charge was too big, you wouldn't be able to get out. In a way, setting charges in a tunnel is like being in a gun barrel, But anyway, what Ray would tell was, the gentleman shared with him, was that they would, in mortars and pestle, they would pulverize dried wood to create a wood flour material. And the wood flour, when mixed with dynamite, mixed with nitroglycerin, which is what dynamite would eventually become, it would stabilize, it would make the nitroglycerin less volatile, more tolerant to being shaken around a little bit without exploding.
Okay.
But once the explosion went off, the cellulose material would actually explode with it. It would be an accelerant. And it's the principle of flour in a silo. If you set a charge in flour is so combustible as a material, it just explodes. Well, wood flour would make the nitroglycerin more stable, but it would also accelerate the size of the explosion. So it was an ideal material.
So you could use less nitroglycerin if you had this wood flour in here, which was a waste product.
You could use,
right?
You would put the flour in with the nitroglycerin. It would make it safer to handle, but it would make a bigger explosion. And that's true. I mean, that was just kind of science in those days. So Ray remembered that. Ray's working in the fish store, and he just tucks that bit of information away. But Ray also realizes all day walking around the fish store, as he gets a little older, pretty soon he owns the fish store. And he realizes that he could buy sawdust and put sawdust on the floor in the morning, and then all the fish guts and the smell and all the liquid and every stuff would go down. The sawdust would absorb it, and then at the end of the day, he'd sweep up all the sawdust and put it in a can, throw it away, and the shop stayed cleaner. So Ray then, he would have been downtown. His fish store was. By this time, we're all the way up to about 1915. Ray's got a fish store. He's married by then. He decides, hey, I can go out to the big sawmill on the waterfront and get all the sawdust in the world, get more sawdust than I need. It's a waste product out there.
Were they just let him take whatever he wanted for
Ray
free?
was smart enough to go out. He went out to the St. Paul and Tacoma sawmill, which is out in the middle of the water in the tide flats, signed a contract with them and said, basically, I'll haul this waste material away. But in exchange, you got to let me have the exclusive contract to do it. I got to be the guy to do it. So they say, okay, sure, we'll get rid of it. Doesn't cost us anything to get rid of it. Ray turns around and starts a business with wagons, selling sawdust to all the bars and restaurant kitchens and any smelly business there was downtown. His people would come along and they'd deliver sawdust on the floor in the morning. And at the end of the day or the end of the week, depending on the contract, they'd come along and pick up the sawdust and haul it away and just get rid of it. And that became a business. So Ray got into the business of selling sawdust as a as a utility for all the businesses downtown.
I'm surprised he didn't come up with a way to then use the dirty sawdust
Right.
in something else and sell that on to somebody else.
That came next. Because, you'd think like, right.
Yeah.
So then he decides that one of the things to get rid of the sawdust, he just created a big burner down on the waterfront and go down and burn the sawdust. But then he decides, hey, I could sell the sawdust just for fuel because it burns really good. And so then he starts a fuel business. And he starts selling not just sawdust, but small scrap wood, too, for people that are using wood as a fuel for heating in their homes. And he gets into the business. And now he's down on Dock Street. He's got out of the fish business. So by the 1920s, he's out of the fish business, and he's in the business of taking wood waste, really, from the mills and the big. By now we've got sash and door companies that are making and outdoor siding mills. People that are putting bigger and bigger pieces of waste wood, and he's picking them up and then recycling them basically into fuel, burning fuel, and also into now making wood flour, which he.
Was the sawdust that he was using for turning into fuel, was he compacting it into bricks or pellets or something? Or would people just buy sawdust and put that right into their stoves?
No, he was buying the sawdust and he was bringing it to his company, Gamble Company, Gamble Fuel. It started out. He started the company, and at his site down on Dock Street, he had a big crusher thing that would take the sawdust and turn it into flour.
Okay.
Then he was also taking... Sawdust itself was not. He was doing a value-added thing with the sawdust. He was pulverizing the sawdust he had. He wasn't just reselling it as sawdust.
Okay.
But he was also starting to have lots of wood scraps and stuff that he was selling as fuel at the same time. Now, about 1914, 15, the big push is on to build a Army base at Fort Lewis, what would become Fort Lewis. And it's the development of that base where Ray starts selling fuel, and also saw the wood flour he was producing was being used in the creation of linoleum. I mean, there were a lot of industrial applications for it.
I saw Bakelite was one thing that wood flour was used for, is in the creation of Bakelite, which I love Bakelite. I think it's really fun.
Yeah.
I find that in an
and I love linoleum too. It's cool, It's,
linseed oil and sawdust.
Yep.
It's great.
Yeah. But these things are all it's making him a good living. He's doing better and better. He's certainly a merchant class, he and his wife here in town. But with the coming of Fort Lewis, Ray hits the jackpot. And that is that with the building of a big military base and the First World War, DuPont comes and builds a munitions plant here to create bombs and bullets, And Ray's there with wood flour, and the old wisdom of the Chinese firecracker man was that wood flour was a base material in the creation of explosives. And he had already been selling a little bit of wood flour to some of the small explosive companies here that were creating dynamite for blowing up stumps and in the timber industry and in the woods. But when the war started, then it was the whole town of DuPont out near Fort Lewis was built around for workers at the big munitions plant.
I did not know that about DuPont. I always just thought it was a coincidence that it was named after the company that owns that, but it was actually
far and away the biggest explosives manufacturing operation in the state, if not the whole Northwest, was at DuPont, right outside the military base. And Ray got the contract, and here's Ray with a contract with the biggest sawmill in the area at the Tacoma St. Paul, and an exclusive contract to pick up the sawdust for free. He mills it and then sells it to DuPont. And it's like printing money. Right. And so by the time the First World War is over, by 1920, Ray is exclusively just producing wood flour. kind of getting out of the fuel business. And by then, he's on his way to being a millionaire at a time when in 1920, $1 million was a lot of money.
Yeah, we looked it up. It's like, how much did we
Well,
comparatively?
I
it
just
was,
looked at what it was in 1935. And
Oh, yeah.
so $1 million in 1935 was over $22 million today.
Yeah.
So we're saying a millionaire at that time, not by their standards. He was worth over $1 million at that time. Okay, wow.
So now his life gets a little bit easier in a way. I mean, he's kind of got this automatic money-making machine where his people just go and pick up free sawdust and take it to the mill. They turn it into wood flour, and he hauls it out to DuPont. Eventually, he builds a wood flour production mill out at DuPont. So now it's even easier. And really, he can then just really, he and his wife both begin to look at indulging themselves in some of the other interests he has. By the 1920s, he owns several pieces of property. He buys a sawmill in Proctor. And by 1928, 29, he builds the Ray Gamble building where Knapp's is today, which was apartments upstairs and retail down below. And so he gets into real estate, starts building buildings, owning property. And then, aside from the money-making business side of things, Ray and Addie both have personal interests, and we're back to the elephant again. Ray begins to collect elephants, and we're talking about somebody with a lot of money who's not just collecting any old carved elephant. Ray begins to travel all over the world. Ray and Addie go all over the world, Asia, Europe, Africa, everywhere, and collecting the rarest elephants, carved elephants, small elephants, artwork that they can find. And at one point, I think it's the third largest piece of crystal quartz in the world carved into an elephant that Ray has. He's got diamonds and gold.
Wow.
This incredible collection. Carved ivory was a favorite of his.
I found an article about it. And at that point, the collection was only 2,000. And I found it very interesting. They refer to his wife as the keeper of the elephants.
She's the elephant keeper.
And of course, they mentioned in the article, because it was written, I don't know when this was written exactly, but because somebody has to dust those.
I bet, yes. As someone who's had knickknacks in the past, I don't have so many on purpose.
Well, and Ray, in the middle of this, Ray puts his money in the right place right as the Depression hits in 1929. And while everybody else in the country is, in the depths of an economic depression, Ray buys the Elephant House, buys the Walker Stone mansion on 30th, and turns it into the Elephant House. It becomes a showplace for his elephant collection. And it's still there today. The Elephant House is this stone building. The Walker family were the ones who started the sandstone quarry out at Wilkeson. And that sandstone is used in our state capitol. It's kind of the finest cut stone that we have in the area. So the owner of that company, his mansion gets sold during the Depression, and Ray buys it and instantly goes in. All the louvers over the heating vents are all inscribed with carved with elephant.
No.
He put
Wow.
elephant light fixtures. Everywhere he could put an elephant, in addition to his thousands of carved elephants.
So did it go from amazing and attractive to a little bit tacky at some point, or does he maintain the beauty and class?
Yeah, it goes. I don't think it was ever tacky. I think Ray and Addie had pretty good taste. It's
good.
kind of like Hearst Castle, William Randolph Hearst. It's a little over the top.
Yes.
Just because he's
Over the top.
over the top.
I read that his elephant collection, it was so large that it was basically like they're on all surfaces, they're on the floor, they're just lined up everywhere. Just everywhere you turn is another elephant because there's nowhere to put them.
Yes.
Yeah. He was prone to conversation pieces, to things that would engage people and bring them in. He just loved that part of it. Both he and Addie, they were both very affable people. And I think that the elephant collection was just a way to kind of just engage people, you know? I mean, how can you not
Right.
Talk about all the elephants. Yeah. How was he a good storyteller, he and Addie?
Of course, Ray's been dead for years, but he had to be. Incredibly affable, all kinds of pictures of him with people. And we haven't even started to talk about Ray's other great passion in life, which is magic, stage magic. And as a young person, and maybe even from going back to the Firecracker Man, this sort of sense of things in the world that just seem fantastic. You know, that are just worth diving into, that are just, and Ray very early on was interested in card tricks and sleight of hand, that kind of stuff. But as he grew a little bit older and as his wealth had accumulated, he really dove into it deeply, really got into, he was president of the West Coast Association of Magicians. I've written about this a little bit, but in the days before television, stage magic was a really big deal. Television kind of took the magic out of magic, because you could do anything and it could be fake.
Right.
It's like deep fake stuff, but before that, when somebody was right in front of you and they could turn a gerbil into a rabbit right in front of your eyes, or they could levitate a bouquet of flowers in the air. It was pretty, you marveled at that.
Sure. And at that time, your entertainment options were limited by our standards. So I could see it being a really, really popular thing for sure. You see people singing and dancing or magic shows or a play, and that's kind of...
Vaudeville, which was the old live theater thing. Every vaudeville bill would have a magician in it. And, you'd have people getting sawed in half and big dazzling illusions. But, the big celebrities in the entertainment business, a lot of them came from the magic world. There was Carter and Blackwell and Mandrake and Houdini and all of whom, by the way, came to Tacoma and stayed with Ray. And then there were all these people that were amateur magicians that were celebrities in their own right. So Orson Welles, whose daughter lived here in Tacoma, and Orson Welles came to Tacoma often. General MacArthur, Edgar Bergen, Candace Bergen's father.
Will Rogers.
Will Rogers came to Ray's house.
When I was reading it, because I didn't know much about Will Rogers, of course, I've heard his name before, and he was in vaudeville as well, right?
Yep.
Was he not the one with the ventriloquist dummies? Which one was that? Was
That's
that Will Rogers?
Edgar Bergen.
Edward Bergen, yeah. The ventriloquist dummy with the monocle and the top hat? Yes. That was him, because I hadn't heard that name before. Yep. But then once I saw that, we know who this is.
Will Rogers was a kind of a satirist and a political commentator, had a radio program, but he was a beloved figure in American culture in the 19-teens and 20s, got on the radio kind of, and tragically, he was big into aviation, came through Tacoma and then on his way to Alaska in an airplane, which was pretty novel in those days, and then died in an airplane crash in Alaska.
Did I read that he was the first man to fly solo around the world?
I don't think so, but Will Rogers, who in the days of Lindbergh and that whole aviation, the early days of aviation, he was a big advocate for aviation. And his flyer, his partner, a man named Wiley Post, came to Tacoma very often. He was in the Northwest a lot, Will Rogers was. We digress.
I know, we digress. Now we're on to Will. We could do an episode about Will Rogers.
So was Ray, did he have a special trick that he was well known for?
Well, he was really big into card tricks. So that was his. And in fact, he sort of indulged the whole, it was called a ring, which is kind of the local club of magicians. So the Tacoma ring was part of a larger Northwest ring. And Ray created this elaborate trophy and got up the idea that every year they would inscribe the name of the magician who came up with the coolest card trick. And you got extra points if it was somebody could do it without being a high skill, If it was a minimum amount of actual gadgetry in it. It was just a really cool thing you could do. Then you'd get your name on the Ray Gamble trophy
Wow.
for card tricks, so.
Did the trophy have an elephant on it somewhere?
No, I have a picture of it.
Do you?
It's got it's got a lady, this sort of in this dancing, huge, big cast lady on the top of it, and she's got a deck of cards in her hand, so of course.
Yeah, I'll have to get that photograph from you for sure.
Yeah.
Sounds like Ray enjoyed being the life of a party. Could you say that about him?
Yes. He was a showman.
Okay.
The one addition he made to the Elephant House was underneath the garage at the Elephant House, he built a theater. And in the sort of entry area before you went into the theater's still there. And it has the big curtains on it with RG, Ray Gamble on the curtain. But in the entryway, before you go into the seating area, Ray put in sliding panels in the wall that had slot machines in them for his friend. This at a time when slot machines were not legal.
Okay.
Right.
He had a mirror on the wall. When people would come down there, he'd pull a little diamond ring out and have them put it on and sign their name in the mirror with the diamond ring. So like Orson Welles.
Oh, wow.
And then he would say, just keep the ring. So the mirror with the mirror with all the signatures in it was down in the theater area. And then he would have people come and they would do magic shows and other kinds of shows in the basement at the house.
I'm wondering if he had some secret panels for some secret bottles of whiskey too.
Yeah. Well, I think, as you know, Shay, that you came across some of the police reports about Ray having trouble with the prohibition laws, and that's probably true.
He was charged $200.
No, that was a lot back then, though. Think about that.
Because I think that was in, I want to say 1917. I saw that article, and yeah, I was charged $200 for illegal possession of alcohol. Because prohibition in Washington started in 1916?
Well, it started in Tacoma and Washington early. It didn't take effect as an amendment to the Constitution until 1920, I believe. But yeah, here in Washington, we were progressive, so we were 4 years earlier in getting prohibition. Yeah,
we were prohibition progressives.
But, on the other hand, it had to be a pretty flagrant violation of the law to get arrested in Tacoma, because there was never a time where Tacoma was
really following the law.
We were not really into prohibition.
Well, it kind of sounded, from the article I found, it sounded as if he was maybe in cahoots with a local druggist, I think at Acme drugstore, in transporting this for sale, perhaps. Like maybe he was a little bit of a bootlegger.
That's what I was wondering. For a $200 fine at that era seems pretty steep.
Well, when he finished the Gamble apartment building in Proctor, the main corner tenant there was a drugstore. So, and that would have been opened up during Prohibition. So
maybe
likely could have happened.
Maybe it's just a lesser talked about extra side business he had going on.
Yeah. So Tacoma, before Prohibition, because of the size of the breweries here in Tacoma, it was something like 1 in every 10 households in Tacoma had somebody working in the brewery business. So it was not a business where the local economy really depended on that. And because Tacoma was a place where sailors and lumberjacks and people working in the woods would come to spend their money, I mean, by 1918, Tacoma had 10,000 theater seats downtown. 10,000 people were in the theater seat every night.
Because I'd imagine back then theater would not be something everyone got to do, right? Would you have to be more wealthy or anyone could have done it?
These are the Pantages theaters finished in 1919, Rialto 1918. We actually had the big Tacoma Theater, which 2,000 seats was before the turn of the century. But yeah, you could start to go to the movies, the silent movies, and you'd go to vaudeville. So you'd go and watch magicians and dog and pony acts and, all that stuff was going on downtown. So Ray's fascination with show business and all that stuff was pretty supported by the community of Tacoma during his years.
Right.
In a way, he was a lucky guy. He was just in the right place, and he was pursuing things he loved about life, and he made a bunch of money and so could live pretty large. And he loved it,
Right.
he lived it large,
Right.
he was out there doing it.
He sounds like he was a guy who loved life and found ways to not just survive, but to really become wealthy.
Yep.
Like he really took his passions to the next level.
So there's one sort of a little bit darker side to things that comes up. And again, back to Ray's encounter, his exchange with the firecracker men. And that was that when the firecracker men, Ray would say, shared with him the secret of wood flour, which would make his fortune for him, there was this kind of a sense of caution about it. That it was a secret that Ray kept, and he didn't tell that story freely. And not that it was a curse, but there was the suggestion that somehow a lot of lives kind of are tied to the industry and explosives and all that stuff, that it comes at a cost. And there's an aspect to this that it's kept secret, it's kept quiet for a reason, that this isn't something you should flout too much. And I think Ray kind of was aware of that. Well, by the time we get to the late 1930s, Ray's production of wood flour for the DuPont company, as America's starting to realize we're headed towards the Second World War, Ray's making a lot more money selling wood flour. In fact, he sells the company for millions along the way. But Ray is kept on as a sort of consultant and an advisor. And as we get closer to the war, Ray is given security clearance at Fort Lewis.
Oh, wow.
And eventually Ray is brought in to consult on the use of wood flour and the development of explosives for a new application in the realm of explosives. And we know that Ray had security to be able to go to Eastern Washington, where, and not to get too Oppenheimer about this here for a second, but in Eastern Washington, in the Tri-Cities, the Manhattan Project was under construction, was under development. And Ray would have been brought into the very small circle of people who were aware of what the Manhattan Project was all about because of his operational understanding and the science of wood flour and the potential use of wood flour as a component in the building of a new weapon that would be devastating in its power. Mm-hmm. And Ray was brought into that circle. It was a secret that he knew. And you get the sense that Ray was just a little bit haunted by the suggestion of something like a curse that came from the beginnings. When he was poor and didn't have anything, he was entrusted with something that would make his wealth, it would make his fortune. But there was a cautionary aspect to it. Now, Ray is an older man now in his 50s or 60s. He's starting to see what might be the specter of that curse coming back to affect him. And then, maybe through the war, the worst, darkest aspect of that starts to become a reality. And Ray admits later on and mentions this late in life that the end of the Second World War was an incredibly hard part of him because, in fact, that is what happened. The weapons that were used, the bombs that were dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, used wood flour as the buffering material in the atomic bomb. And Ray would have known about that. So all of this would have been going on in his mind. And there is a time there after 1945, 46, where Ray's joie de vivre, his engagement with the love of life, the luckiness that he had enjoyed all his life, starts to have a bit of an effect on him. But he recovers, he comes out of it. The last years of his life, the last 2 decades of his life, he embraces again magic, gets back into it. He becomes very philanthropic. We haven't talked about one thing, and that was that starting at about the same time in the late 30s, Ray starts to put incredible amount of energy into the Lincoln apartment building, which he buys at 2nd and Yakima. And for the rest of his life, it becomes a new passion for Ray. And he goes, even in the years right after the end of the Second World War, Ray and Addie go to Japan. They go to Asia. And he begins to really, something he had always been doing, but something he really takes a passion into is ceramic tiles and architectural fragments. And they begin to go around the world and buy tile fragments from 13th century cathedrals and just the amazing arts and crafts era ceramic tile. And Ray begins to hire artists and artisans, and he begins to transform the Lincoln apartments, which are about 30 units in there, into this ultra-modern, fantastic building. The interior of the Casablanca apartments is breathtaking.
To this day?
Even now.
I'm hoping that we can get in to see it someday. My brother told me that he looked into leasing an apartment there back in it must have been the 90s, but he said that the shower head came up to about his nipple. And so he didn't.
He is a tall guy, but
he is
still.
very tall.
Well, when my wife and I came to Tacoma in about 88, the first place we lived was the penthouse at the Casablanca.
Did you really?
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Did you take pictures when you lived there?
Yeah, they're in I gave you
Great.
some of
Okay.
them.
I'm going
Yeah.
to peruse those. We'll put them on our social media.
So the inside is unbelievable. I mean, Ray, not only did he put tile and murals, there's corridors where you walk down and the mural is just like this mythical landscape with knights and queens and, painted on the walls, and whole ceramic tile murals that are put in living rooms. The baseboard heat, just exotic woods from all over. I mean,
Wow.
doorknobs that were gold finished. He had the apartment on the top floor had a electric eye in the 1950, an electric eye. So if somebody came up the back stair, a little alarm would tell you that somebody was there. In the mailboxes for every unit, the bottoms of the mailboxes had little rheostats on them, and the floor of each mailbox was hinged. So when the mailman came, if there was mail, it hit the contact and a light went on in your apartment to tell you you had mail.
That's so cool.
In the back, behind, there was a garage, and it was a turntable. So when you pulled your car in, you would park, and then you would hit a button, and the whole turntable would turn around so your car was faced out again.
I did not know that existed back then, because I've seen those in Japan. I think they're cool. I sit there and watch people just turn their cars around on the turntable because it's so interesting. But wow. Do you know if he used any of those tiles in his own home?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And especially in the theater area. And he tiled the inside of his garage.
Wow.
The other thing he loved was neon. So he would use glass tiles with colored neon behind it and create archways. I mean, beautiful metalwork. I mean, polished copper. I mean,
So when people move into the Casablanca apartments, are they given the history behind it, or are they just in there going, wow, this is really unique and cool, but
the
idea?
manager there has been there a long time. She's an artist too. It's not very usual that units open up in there, especially the really special units are pretty long-time tenants in the
What do they rent for? Do you know? Do you happen to know what they're going for now these days?
No, I don't know.
Well, and I would imagine you've got the lease is probably a mile long because there's probably a lot of caveats about any of damage to that original
upgrades, anything
stuff. Like you can't touch it.
Yeah. Well, Ray,
I would be afraid tenants are terrible. They would just ruin it all.
Well, Ray left even before he died. He dedicated all of the rental income off the Casablanca to UPS. And then when he passed away, he left the building to UPS. They then, since then, they've sold it. But the current owners are very careful about it because there was a time where people were starting to get in there, and some of these individual arts and crafts tiles, I mean, they're by major artist makers, so they're very, very valuable. So the building's secure now. There are missing tiles inside that where people have gotten in and
shipped it out.
So you have to be a little understanding that you can't just throw it open and, I mean, it's
absolutely.
For example, they have resisted having it being designated a historic building. So even though it's unquestionably one of the most unusual buildings in the whole country.
What's behind the resistance of making it
building? It's partly the notoriety of it. I mean, I even feel a little bit guilty here raving on about it because it's so special and so unique. And there is a sense of stewardship and care given the owners and the manager, the people that maintain the building. They have a superintendent. They really take care of it. And the people that live there are a community that watch out for each other and for the building itself. So it's a unique, wonderfully balanced situation. But in a way, it's Ray's greatest gift. I mean, it was, of all the things he did, the lasting things he did, I think the Casablanca, because, the Elephant House wasn't built for him. He just modified it. The Casablanca was handcrafted by Ray. 18 years he spent putting, and every square inch of the corridors and everything are,
the amount of accomplishments that he's got in his lifetime, and then still spending 18 years on one apartment complex, just crazy to me.
Yeah.
Very driven man.
Yep.
With an eye for what he wanted, for sure.
Yep.
Now, do you know what ended up happening to his elephant collection? Did it get auctioned off? Does family have it? Do you know?
Yeah, I've come across, it ended up, his second wife, Addie, passed away, and in about 5 or 6 years before Ray died, and I want to say it was 6 years. I think she died about early 60s, and then Ray remarried.
Helen,
and married. This is Helen, yeah. And then Helen kept the collection and lived in the house for 5 or 6 years after Ray's passing. And then she sold the entire thing in one sale. Now, I had heard a story that the purchaser was another elephant collector who Ray knew, and that there was an agreement between the two of them that whoever died first would give the other the chance to buy the other's collection.
First shot, yeah.
So, but I've also seen reference to there being an auction where the pieces were sold off by a dealer.
Yeah, I saw something about just a small fraction of the collection was valued at over $1 million. So I'm sure the whole thing gave the estate quite a bit of money. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, values are so fluid, over time. So.
Well, and so many of the pieces he had custom made. So how do you value that? You know, and I know I was reading that he did love elephant. He would have them commissioned in Japan, that he would send them raw material and have them carve his elephants and then send them back. And he really liked them, I guess, because their trunks are always up in the air when you get them from Japan.
Well, he had favorite artists that he would commission from, and he would get a piece of ivory or a piece of gemstone or whatever, and then he would figure out which artist he wanted to have carve that piece into an elephant for him.
Touching back on when you talked about him and Addie visiting Asia and Japan, this would have been after the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki?
Well, they traveled both before and after. And, we don't think about it today. In fact, it's kind of weird how so many people that live in Tacoma don't even recognize we're a port city. And, before freeways and airplanes, there was a lot of steamship and passenger travel in and out of Tacoma. And it was relatively easy. Tacoma's big Japanese population was because the railroad operated a steamship line that went between Tacoma and Yokohama. So we had lots of, and it was no big deal. I mean, there were of the merchant class within our Japanese community before the Second World War, they would go back and forth vacation or to go back to get married or attend somebody's christening or a wedding or a funeral. So it was fairly easy to travel across the Pacific by steamship. In the 30s, Nettie and Ray would have traveled across. It would have been easier to get to Japan than it would be to get to Cairo.
Wow.
Well, and was it about 13 days to get to Japan from here, or was it 30 days? I want to say it was only 13. I want to say it was fairly short with steamships.
Yes. By the time steamships came in.
That's just like a cruise.
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, I think on the Japan was close because you could, on a flat map, you don't see the curvature of the Earth. But actually, if you take an arc across, it's like the polar flights for airplanes. It's a lot close. It's quicker, shorter flight if you fly from Seattle to London over the polar route than if you go to New York and then across the Atlantic. So if you take an arc across the North Pacific, it's a fairly quick trip to get to Japan.
It's only a 9-hour flight from Seattle.
Yeah.
Except for when I go and it turns into a 12.5-hour flight for some reason.
Yeah.
Shay's luck.
Back to the magic for a second. I've got a couple little books here, but we had conferences here for magicians. I just love it. This whole kind of era of Ray and the magnetic sort of presence he created for this hobby that became a passion for him. There were magic stores in Tacoma. There were contests. The theaters would have magic shows come in and teach school kids how to do magic. You could go and buy a magic kit, The alley that runs behind where the Rialto is in the back of the Knights of Pythias building, which is kind of a magical building in its own right. But for all the way through the 1950s and 60s, there was a magic store there, like Daikon Alley, or Harry Potter. There was people would go down, kids would go in and they would buy magic stuff. And Ray had a sort of protege here, a young man named Co Norton, who became a sort of celebrity in the magic world. He ended up learning magic and doing stage magic. But there was a kind of superhero in the magic world in comic books called Mandrake the Magician.
I think I've heard of this.
And and it was a big deal on radio and all that kind of stuff. Well, for a long time, there was a idea that some people believed that television was incompatible with magic, that you couldn't do it because of what we've already talked about, how everybody was suspicious of everything. Nothing was real typical magic. But in the 1950s, they finally decided that they were going to do a radio or a television program called Mandrake the Magician. And so they went ahead, they looked around for somebody to play the part. Ray was consulted on the deal, and in the end, he picked Co Norton, who had graduated from Stadium High School and was sort of the protege, whatever. And so they ended up getting the money. It was like CBS, so one of the big networks to be in. They filmed the whole season. It was like 9-10 episodes of Mandrake the Magician, and it was going to come out the same time as Superman was on television, and it was going to be kind of this superhero thing with this Tacoma actor, who's going to play the whole thing. And then, as if for no unexplainable reason, it got canceled and it was never shown.
Before it even got started, it
never
was done.
happened.
Oh, no. But they filmed it all?
It was all filmed, but nobody ever saw it. Nobody ever knew anything about it. And then, as if by magic, a company found the old footage.
Oh, wow.
And it showed up on the internet with Co Norton from Tacoma playing Mandrake the Magician.
Oh, my goodness.
So,
imagine finding that gold.
So Ray would have lived to see the TV show come back, to see the sort of return of stage magic on television, would have been able to see that. But then it never would have been seen. So Ray would have died before anybody never would have been able to see the the end of the film. But
Did
anyway,
you ever try to track that down, that footage, to maybe show at the Blue Mouse? Because that would
it's
have
on
been,
my website.
Is it?
Okay.
I found it's on YouTube.
Oh,
Yeah, so
that's wonderful.
go look for Mandrake the Magician. It's in a format that it's black and white,
Okay.
and it's pretty fuzzy, but you can follow the story and you can kind of see the
We'll
whole
have to check
thing.
that out.
So
Yeah.
anyway, yeah. So when I found that, or when I first looked at it, I thought, I never got to meet Ray, but at least I got to see Mandrake on
Right.
television.
In action.
So
In
that's
action.
cool.
In movement. Yeah.
Because we don't have any film of Ray. I haven't been able to find any recordings of him, so I've never heard his voice. I never met him, so that level of intimacy I've just never been able to get to.
Right.
But
to really capture his personality.
yeah.
Yeah.
And he never was filmed, we've got still photographs and stuff, but he's just that gauzy figure that's just a little bit out of touch, just a little bit beyond.
Little mysterious. He still has that little mystique about him.
Yeah.
Well, and it's 100 years later, a lot of what he's provided this area is still here. It's still magical even.
Yep.
The Casablanca apartments being so amazing, and now people take care of. You got the Elephant House, all of that. That's just insane that he's still such a character here. And I've never heard of him till now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, in hearing his story from you and what I've found online, he almost feels like a character who kind of represents Tacoma.
Yeah.
Right?
Mhm.
He kind of represents the spirit
Yes.
of Tacoma, of this pull yourself up by the bootstraps, get out there, a little bit quirky.
We can do amazing things. Let's just turn this simple thing into something amazing.
Yep, I think you're right. I think you're right.
Yeah. I think it's a great representation. And I had never heard about him until maybe it was your website that I saw, or something else. I think I saw a little blurb on the Elephant House because I do love the architecture of Tacoma. And then that led me down that rabbit hole where it was perfect because I had just met you. And here it is that you're basically the expert that I know in this area and on him. And I don't know where I was going with that.
No, but I think you're right.
I went down a road.
I think in him and his life and his story, there is something that gives you insight into the unique character of the city we live in.
Yes. Yeah.
And, it's like Dale Chihuly or anybody. I mean, we're not like, it's not Orson Welles. It's not like a world figure, but it is a local hero that's a window into what makes our city different than other places.
Absolutely.
We are a port city. There is this international aspect. There's a ethnic and a cultural makeup of Tacoma that's idiosyncratic, it's
it all
weird
started with
and
fish.
Crazy. And
Fish on the port.
and
Yeah.
an exchange between a Chinese firecracker man, which, at the turn of the century connected to a transcontinental railroad and all that kind of stuff. And some guy who ends up having a superhero on television, and somehow there's a through line that is about us, that kind of makes sense.
Well, and even though Ray was a white man, the interaction with this immigrant really is what sparked the rest of his life, which is very interesting because the city is, as we heard about in your excellent presentation you give, this is a city of immigrants. This place is here because of immigrants. And it is what it is today because of those immigrants. And even though white men typically get all the glory, we can still trace roots back to the contributions of those immigrants, which I think is a good part of his story for sure.
Yep.
And fish.
Immigrants and fish.
Immigrants and fish.
And sawdust.
Sawdust. Yeah, not a sexy topic. Sawdust, wood flour. I was really hoping you'd have a little bit more info on his bootlegging.
She wants the salacious details.
I know, I want the salacious details because he sounds like a fun guy.
Yeah, but he was a small timer. Boy, if you want to get in the bootlegging topic, we can go a long way.
I might have
There's
to do
much
that,
bigger players in that game than him.
Yeah.
So,
He was a dabbler in that too.
yeah.
I noticed he dabbled in many things, right? But most people who dabble in that many things don't find success at the level that he did in so many of those things.
Yeah.
Do you think he would have found that kind of success in magic and architecture and all of that if he hadn't first found success with this sawdust wood flower process?
Yeah. What we overlook a little bit is that he was a businessman. Right. He was in a part of the world where wood products, forest products were a growing area of commerce.
We were rich in that resource.
And he was just he just looked in a different way at the same thing that sawmills and Weyerhaeuser and, all the other Harmon furniture. I mean, all these other products that were coming out that people were making money off of. It's just he found a little niche. He was innovative enough. He was a good enough businessman to be able to prosper off it. So, we talk a lot about the magic of it, but, there's some pretty just basic economics going on that is part of his life, too, that he understood and he was good at. So,
absolutely. Well, Michael, thank you for sharing this story with us today. This has been thrilling for me. I don't know about you, Jody,
definitely.
But I've just been sitting here just
I know.
Like a little child,
soaking
just so
it
excited.
in.
This was an amazing story, an amazing man. You're a great storyteller, by the way.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And we appreciate it so much. Thank you so much. Are there any pet projects that you want people to know about right now? Maybe something in preservation that people could go become more aware of, or sign a petition to save a certain building, or support in any way?
Well, I'm very much involved in the Nettie Asbury house up on the hilltop, and Nettie's story and that building and that project. So that's a positive for me. Okay. I worry about, the Ryan house in Sumner right now is a pioneer building that's right downtown Sumner that may get demolished.
Was it impacted by the fire? Is that why? Or
no, it was going to be restored, and then just political winds changed, and the city council just don't see a place for an old building, in the middle of a modern suburban or city. I worry about Holy Rosary Church.
Oh.
The Archdiocese has pretty well signaled that spire that we all see when we drive down I-5, I'm not sure that building is going to be able to be with us for long.
That's a shame.
I think we have to pay attention to that.
There's the landmark on the Sound. Is there any hope of stopping demolition on that one? Or is it a done deal?
So. It's a residential building. It's a huge building that would be so much easier to adaptively reuse for housing than to demolish and try to build new apartments or whatever. For the older city areas like Tacoma, and for our area where you've got a built environment in place already, for environmental reasons, we need to be much more mindful of the adaptive reuse potential in what's already built, rather than having everything go to the landfill and start over again. So environmentally, I'm very much involved. I know Deputy Mayor Walker is involved in doing what Portland does, which is if you're going to demolish a building that's over 50 years old, you have to take it apart and redirect the materials into reuse rather than into the landfill.
That's a great policy.
And why that old? Why the age
Well, this is mostly directed at residential buildings. And the reality is that most of the neighborhoods in Tacoma, they're wood frame buildings. They're 80 or 90% of the building is made out of wood. Most of them were built before 1920, so it's old growth timber that they're made out of. And all that old growth has sequestered carbon in it, which when you send that to the landfill, all that carbon goes into the atmosphere. It's a carbon release. So if we can reuse all that and hold that carbon in a wood form and reuse it, then we do a lot better for the environment. And if we release it, it's shame on us.
It's absolutely. Well, we are rebuilding. We're building a recording studio, and we are repurposing almost everything.
It's mostly stuff that we just find in her shop.
and some furniture I didn't know what to do with, but repurposing everything.
Do you know if McMenamins had looked at Landmark on the Sound at all as a project? Because it seems right up their alley. They love those old Masonic buildings.
I don't know. I think some contacts were probably made. I didn't make them. I didn't talk to Mike about it or anybody. So,
anytime I mention to my dad that we're trying to get some tours with McMenamins and I have contact with some of the people in there now, he's like, you need to tell them about that place in Des Moines. And I was like, Dad, I'm sure somebody's told them about it already. Yeah. They're not going to take me going, hey, you should check out this place.
Thank goodness Shay was here.
I know. We would never have known about this building if it wasn't for Shay.
Well, we don't think about it, but that part of the state right now, the Weyerhaeuser headquarters building, which is 50 years old now. The
one
you
see right there at Federal Way. With all the,
that's also, its future is clouded as well.
Yeah. It seems like that would be a good place for like a community college.
It's an interesting place.
We need another I've been Green River Community College annex right there.
When I was, when it was Weyerhaeuser and they were operating in there, I'd been there before for some conferences, and it's beautiful. Like you're in the woods and you can feel it. Like you're in a building, but you're still in the forest.
The exterior of it is so cool.
It is.
It's weird. You're like, what is that? It's so great.
Understood why they would have vacated that. As amazing it is.
I think you're right. It would be very adaptable for educational use. Community college would be great for that. But I think there was some discussion about some of the Urban Waters building, the idea maybe there'd be a state agency there that would be related to environment or something. Because it's already built,
Right. Yeah.
But part of the importance of that building architecturally and as a landmark is the open space around it. It's that it's the equivalent of like a 15-story building, but it's laying on its side.
Right.
And then it looks out over that big open field that you see. That's part of the importance of it. The company that now owns the entire campus builds warehouses. So it is kind of terrifying to think that
would just be
whole
another,
area be surrounded.
Warehouse land.
Awful.
Yeah.
Ugh.
When I was in there, this is bad. I kind of got the feeling that it would make a good cult headquarters. Just like when you're looking out on the valley, it felt very.
Ooh, now I really got to go in there. I love me a cult. Well, hey guys, we got to wrap this up. Michael, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, my pleasure.
This was
absolutely
just a blast for us. And for all the listeners out there, you can read his excellent articles on his website, tacomahistory.live. He also often contributes to the Columbia magazine. Is that correct?
Yep.
Which is where I got a great article about Ray Gamble in the one from the fall 2018 edition of that. So that's tacomahistory.live. I occasionally give presentations like the one at McMenamins Elks Lodge. Do you have any of those coming up?
No.
Oh, man. It's all right. We got our own private presentation.
Right,
here,
we did.
Was even better.
Yes. I I would have listened to you all night at McMenamins, and I could have listened to you all day here for sure.
If we had had more time.
Everybody, do check out Tacoma History Live and Michael's work, because it just is. It makes living in the Northwest or the Tacoma area, when you understand the history or learn the history, you're just more engaged with your own community, and it just brings value to where you live, and it enriches your experience. So this is, I thank you for your work, because you keep this stuff alive.
Yes.
These things would disappear into the history and never be known again if it weren't people like you. So I really appreciate the work you do.
Well, thank you. I love what you guys are doing too. So let's find something else to.
Yes,
we will. Oh, for sure. Well, thank you so much, you guys. Don't forget to subscribe and follow our show. Share it with a friend. I'll have a link in the show notes that has a link to all the places that you can listen to it, as well as our own little website, which we are slowly building. And that would really help us to grow our listenership. So we will see you next time.
Yep. See you next week.
Another great episode, and
see you down the rabbit hole.